Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football for the South Carolina fans. Y'all already know, and this is one of those programs that I am just so fired up for spring practice to start. And it's largely for a couple of different reasons. Yes, you have a lot of new names that are coming into this program through the transfer portal. You have a couple of early enrollee freshmen that sound like they're going to play for South Carolina in 2025. But I think most of all, spring practice for me, as it pertains to South Carolina, is about the guys going into year two, is about the guys going into year three within this South Carolina program, where you look at how does Shane Beamer in South Carolina operate on the recruiting trail. They take a lot of projects. And what I mean by projects are guys that, hey, probably won't be able to play year one or year two, but come year three, year four, could be really good football players. Well, going into 2025, you're in that situation where you got a lot of really intriguing young players on this roster that are looking to kind of take that step in 2025. And spring practice is largely the time where we get to figure out and get a sense of, all right, who are going to be the guys for South Carolina in the 2025 season. Spring practice has not started yet, but we're starting to hear some early returns of, hey, what has winter workouts look like for South Carolina? And I'm not getting up here and saying, hey, you hear good things out of winter workouts from players. That means they're going to be all SEC guys in 2025. But look, at the end of the day, football at the rudimentary level is a height, weight, speed sport. You're really big and you're really fast. You're probably going to be a pretty good football player on the field Saturdays in the fall. And I want to go over some names that are intriguing me the most coming out of winter workouts, some names that we've heard some positive buzz around. Now, before we get into it, as always, the South Carolina fans, I think most importantly, look, if y'all are checking this out on March 14th, chances are you're a South Carolina fan that follows this program pretty damn closely, that will be reading the spring practice notes. Let it fly in the comments section in terms of the names that you are most excited about heading into spring ball. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. The amount of support from the South Carolina fans it's been amazing. Many of y'all know I'm extremely high on this football team going into 2025. It's a program that I just have a blast talking about too. The amount of support y'all show means the world. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with a player that I might just need to put my hand up and say I was wrong on. When Devonte Miles committed to South Carolina, coming from the MAC, I went back and looked at a little bit of the 2024 film, and I said when he committed to South Carolina, I don't know how much he's going to play for the South Carolina Gamecocks in 2025. The 2024 film did not jump out to me a ton. And I had question marks about him coming from the MAC and being a contributor in the SEC in the 2025 year. Well, coming out of winter workouts, it sounds like Devonte Miles is going to play. Now, am I getting up here and saying Devonte Miles is going to play 60 snaps a game, be a first-team All-SEC defender? Not really where I'm trying to go with it. You brought Devonte Miles in to be a rotational guy. And from what you're hearing coming out of winter workouts, I think South Carolina is pleasantly surprised in terms of what they're getting with Devonte Miles. And he's going to be a guy that could maybe give you 15 to 20 solid snaps a game in the 2025 year. And I'll tell you what, if he does give you 15 to 20 solid snaps, that's a massive get for South Carolina in the portal. He's a guy that, yes, you want to replace the impact that guys like TJ Sanders had, but you also want to make sure you're deep enough on the defensive line to go out and play 12 plus games in the SEC. And it sounds like Devonte Miles could be that guy for South Carolina, which should really fire South Carolina fans up, because the biggest question mark I think we all have for South Carolina going into 2025, do we have enough big bodies in the middle of the defensive line to be the elite defense that we were in 2024? You got to replace a lot of bodies. Devonte Miles sounds like he could be a body that South Carolina can lean on in the 2025 year, because the biggest question mark I had was, is he physically ready to play in the SEC in 2025? To hear Devonte Miles standing out during winter workouts, that's a plus if you're a South Carolina fan going into spring ball. Number two, Jalon Kilgore, and it's not necessarily because he's standing out during winter workouts. We know what we're getting with Jalon Kilgore going into 2025. The thing that's standing out to me is the potential position change for Jalon Kilgore, who has played a lot of nickel for South Carolina over the last 2 years, been a damn good nickel for South Carolina the last 2 years, potentially moving back to the safety spot, which coming out of high school, that was the position I thought Jalon Kilgore was going to play. That's the position I think he'll be best at. Why I think this is such a big deal is you look at this South Carolina secondary, very similar to how we talk about this South Carolina offensive line. The question mark is we got a lot of good players here. How can we get the best five players on the football field at the same time? South Carolina's really deep at cornerback. They probably got some cornerbacks that can play nickel at a high level for you in the 2025 year. Well, at the safety position, not so deep. Having Jalon Kilgore and his ability to play nickel, to probably play boundary cornerback if you needed him to, but also move back to the safety spot and give you all SEC caliber reps. That's a sneaky, really big storyline for South Carolina when it comes to maximizing and putting all your best players on the field at the same time. Really intrigued to hear what we hear from Jalon Kilgore at safety because, one, I think he can be a really good safety. But number two, it kind of allows you to get your best football players on the field. Number three, going back to the defensive line, very similar, conversation we had with Devonte Miles with Zavion Hardy. Kid coming up from the JUCO ranks, jumping up to the SEC. The question is, can he play in the SEC immediately in 2025? And can he be a guy that gives South Carolina quality snaps in the 2025 year? And similar to what we've heard about Devonte Miles, we're hearing about Zavion Hardy too. He's up to almost 300 pounds. He certainly looks the part of an interior defensive lineman in this conference. I'm telling you this, if South Carolina gets good enough play in the middle of that defensive line, they're good at the other spots. You got some question marks at linebacker, and we're going to talk about a linebacker a little bit later. But I look at the edge, I look at the secondary, very confident. This South Carolina defense is really good in a couple of different spots. If you can answer the middle of this defensive line and the question marks we have, I don't think it's crazy to talk about South Carolina in 2025 having a very dominant defense once again going into 2025. But you got to answer that question in the middle of that defensive line. To hear guys like Devonte Miles, to hear guys like Zavion Hardy physically impressing during winter workouts, that's the step we needed in the right direction going into 2025. Number 4 on the list, let's go to Brian Rowe Jr. There were a lot of question marks, including from myself. Hey, why did South Carolina not go to the transfer portal and grab a wide receiver? This is probably the answer. South Carolina, with the freshmen that they have coming in at the wide receiver spot, it's by far the most impressive wide receiver class in 2025. Shane Beamer has signed at South Carolina. I think the reason they didn't go out and get into these bidding wars with some of these better wide receivers is because there's a lot of confidence that some of these freshman wide receivers coming into this program will be able to play early for South Carolina. Brian Rowe, although not the flashiest name in this 2025 class, a lot of the attention goes to Donovan Murph or a guy like Malik. I look at Brian Rowe and say 40-inch vertical, a guy that was sneaky, a really solid prospect, blue chip 4-star prospect coming out of high school. Everything we hear, and he's probably the guy that's generating the most amount of buzz on this football team. Everything we hear about Brian Rowe, he's going to play and be a contributor for South Carolina. And it's not only Brian Rowe. It's like, all right, Nick Harbor's only going into year 3. Mazio Bennett's only going into year 2. You got a guy in Michael Smith at tight end who we have a ton of confidence in. This pass catcher room for South Carolina has the chance to be a lot better than I think a lot of us appreciate going into 2025. Here's one other name that we haven't really talked about, but I'm excited for. And the thing that excites me most about Jaron Willis is we know this kid is physically gifted. I'm not all that surprised to hear that winter workouts have gone good for Jaron Willis. He was a really, really highly touted prospect coming out of high school. We knew was physically gifted enough to play. The thing with Jaron Willis was he kind of bounced around, right? Started at Ole Miss, thought he was going to be an edge rusher, He kind of bounces around between edge rusher and off-ball linebacker for most of his early college career. South Carolina needs people to step up at off-ball linebacker. A lot of the conversation goes to a guy like Fred Johnson. A lot of the guy goes to maybe a true freshman, Donovan Darden or Sean Murphy. Jaron Willis is a guy that I don't think we should be sleeping on going into spring practice. Here's what intrigues me the most about not only Jaron Willis, but the South Carolina linebacker room in general. There's not a lot of proven production, right? We all know that. Even with the guys in the portal, Sean Murphy, Justin Okoronkwo coming from Bama, they haven't played a ton. Sean Murphy was a blue chip prospect. Fred Johnson was a blue chip prospect. Jaron Willis was a blue chip prospect. Donovan Darden is a blue chip prospect coming into this program. Justin Okoronkwo, although not kind of a certified blue chip prospect, a guy that is extremely talented, there are capable bodies in this off-ball linebacker room, and you got a decent amount of them. Now, which ones can step up going into spring practice? That's the question that we want to see answered. Do not sleep on a guy like Jaron Willis because I've been sleeping on him. I ain't sleeping on him anymore going into spring ball. Last one I'll say is Cutter Woods. He was previously committed to, I believe, Wake Forest. You know, I'm a Wake Forest guy, graduated there. South Carolina comes in, just stuffs us in a locker, takes our lunch money, takes our quarterback in the 2025 class. Quarterback 2 for South Carolina. And it's not necessarily who's going to be quarterback 2. It's hey, what's the future of this quarterback position look like for South Carolina? There seems to be a lot of confidence in Cutter Woods, and he's not a guy that is going to make a jaw drop when he walks into a room like Lenore Sellers does. Go back to his high school film. I mean, junior year, throws for 4,000 yards, 70% completion percentage, 42 touchdown, state champ. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He's not the biggest athlete, but he's a really accurate passer that can diagnose and throw with anticipation, does a lot of the small things right. And if this kid can develop physically and grab a little bit more juice out of that arm and become just a physically developed quarterback, it sounds like they like what they have with Cutter Woods. And it ain't going to be in 2025 because we know who the starting quarterback is in 2025. We talk about 2026. If Lenore's has a good year, he goes to the NFL draft. You talk about 2027. I like what South Carolina's doing in the quarterback room with Lenore Sellers and then Air Noland and then Cutter Woods. A lot of talent there. Don't sleep on Cutter Woods. You know, Air Noland was the highly sought after prospect out of high school coming in through the portal from Ohio State. It sounds like they really like what they have with Cutter Woods going into his freshman year. We'll sign out there. A lot of names to monitor over the next couple of weeks. Appreciate the South Carolina fans for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.